Welcome to Sparks of History, where Jewish history and world history meet. We are extremely pleased and very honored to have with us today Abie Rotenberg. Abie Rotenberg, as is well known, is a prolific musician, composer, and entertainer, influenced by musicians such as Rabbi Shenker and Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach. Reb Abie has been an illustrious figure on the Jewish music scene, producing compelling hit music since the early 1970s. Reb Abie's legendary music includes the Vakis, Journeys, Aish, and of course the wonderful children's audio series, the Marvelous Midos Machine. And Reb Abie has also been a main fixture in the annual HASC A Time for Music concerts. Moving from music in 2015, Reb Abie published his first novel, The Season of Pepsi Myers, a book about an 18-year-old Jewish boy playing for the New York Yankees, all set in a fictional future. In 2016, Abie Rotenberg, Reb Abie released Eliyahu Hanavi, which is an in-depth analysis of the life of Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet. And more recently, Reb Abie has released Rabbi Akiva, which is a incredibly in-depth study, a wonderful read of Rabbi Akiva. I would say it's now the authoritative work on the life and times of Rabbi Akiva and what Rabbi Akiva means to the Jewish people and to Jewish history. Rabbi Abie, thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you so much for having me. When you say authoritative, I would say perhaps it's the authoritative book in the English language. There are many in Hebrew. Rabbi Kanowitz wrote it's a huge sefer in Hebrew where he quotes every single memra from Chazal and in not only in Agadah but in Halacha as well of Rabbi Akiva. So that's certainly a monumental work on Rabbi Akiva. But perhaps in English, this is certainly the most elaborate or detailed book about Rabbi Akiva.
Okay. And urge all our viewers and listeners, as I did, either go online, Amazon, or wherever else it's offered, your local bookstores. It's a tremendous read and really worthwhile. Just to get started, what inspired you to write this sefer about Rabbi Akiva? And did your musical background influence you in any way in how you approached the writing of this book sefer?
I'll start with the latter question first. I don't think so. I don't think my musical background really has anything to do with my approach to learning or my interest in writing. Um, Perhaps it's the other way around. Perhaps my interest in learning is what influenced my writing because I do pride myself in having studied hard in yeshiva and taking an analytical approach to understanding Torah and Talmud. My approach is one very much based in in pshat, in the simple basic understanding. I don't feel like I have any handle or understanding of the esoteric interpretations of Torah, but I am a very particular person when it comes to trying to understand the basic meaning. And perhaps that rubs off in my music as well. My writing, I try to be very precise. I try to work very hard on language, using the right words and trying to capture the right emotions. But the first question as to why Rabbi Akiva, so my first sefer you mentioned was on Eliyahu Hanavi, and it just hit me probably 15 years ago that if you think about Eliyahu Hanavi, his life was so incredible from the stories about him in Tanakh, but beyond the stories in Tanakh and his life on earth, Eliyahu Hanavi never died. He went up to Shamayim. He comes to every bris. He comes to the Seder. He's gonna be Mavaser the Geula. What a phenomenal, amazing, multifaceted human being, or Malach, or both, but such a fascinating, multifaceted person. And to my knowledge at the time, there was no really single book that focused on Eliyahu Hanavi, certainly not in depth. And I found it fascinating. And when I started to look into it, I wasn't planning on writing a sefer necessarily. When I started studying about him more and more, I discovered that there are so many Chazal, so many Midrashim, so many Gemaras, so many different sources in Tanhuma and in Pirkei Rebbe Lezer. It's all over the place. There are stories about Eliyahu Hanavi that are fascinating. In addition to the Psukim and Tanakh, so it became a work. It took about 8 years to write the Sefer on Eliyahu Hanavi. I was still working at the time. I had a day job, so it took longer because I only had so much time for the Sefer. But he was so fascinating. And after I finished Elio, I was wondering what to do. I enjoyed the project so much, I wanted to do it again. And the next name of a figure in Jewish history or in our lives was Rabbi Akiva. Again, also fascinating life. Such contrast in his life, complete ignorance to total mastery, poverty to wealth, uh, so many stories about him, so many divrei Torah from him. Again, a man of so many different facets. The man who proclaimed Bar Kochba to be Moshiach, the man who lost all of his Talmidim to a terrible plague. Uh, Again, just so many facets and so many dimensions. I started studying him, and again, so many chazal about him, and it turned into a very interesting and wonderful work that took about 5 6 years.
Wow, wonderful. If you can, just a little bit of the historical backdrop of Rabbi Akiva's life, putting it into context of when Rabbi Akiva lived, just the basic parameters of the stages of his life.
So I would like to say to your viewers that it's not a history book. The Rabbi Akiva book is not a history book. If you want to read the history of Rabbi Akiva, there are other sources, certainly that are going to give you the timelines and the sequences and talk about Rabbi Akiva and the world around him at the time. The purpose of the book and the structure of the book is to analyze what Chazal say about Rabbi Akiva, but it does follow the sequence of his life. It starts with him, as an unlearned man, and it follows him through his life. But it studies and analyzes those Chazal in depth, and there is a lot of history to be learned by going through his life and the Chazal about his life. But again, it's not simply a history book; it's much more in depth. Rabbi Akiva lived before and after Churban Bayis Sheni. He was a witness to Churban Bayis Sheni. He also had an incredibly long life. Chazal tell us that he lived 120 years. And one of the um, one of the statements I make in the book is it seems that he was granted this great longevity so that he could actually be a bridge from the second generation of Tanoim and carry that further into the third generation of Tanoim and those who would actually eventually teach Rebbe, who would formulate the Mishnah. So Rabbi Akiva is very much involved and a player in the continuation of our Masorah, of our traditions. So he witnessed the Churban. He saw terrible oppression. The Romans occupied Eretz Yisrael. They destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. And then 50 to 60 years after the Churban Bayis, he witnessed the destruction of Beitar, which led to the deaths of almost another million Jews and the complete devastation of Eretz Yisrael. So even after the Churban, Klal Yisrael still had a strong foothold in Eretz Yisrael. They still had a major presence. There still were schools. The Chazal tell us there were thousands of schools and Tinokos Shel Beis Rabban and Beitar, and that there were shuls and no Beis Hamikdash anymore, but there were places where Jews congregated to serve Hashem, and that was all destroyed in Rebbe Akiva's lifetime. So he saw terrible destruction, oppression, and he died right around the beginning of what we call the Shmad, the terrible 10-year period where the Romans totally disallowed any any Jewish ritual. They disallowed the study of Torah, Bris Milah, Shabbos, Kashrus. They totally tried um, to oppress the Jewish people completely and divest them from the Torah.
You had mentioned that Rabbi Akiva's life was filled with dramatic turns, the ups and downs. Um, what do you think is the most powerful message that his life teaches us today through the prism of Chazal? And what's that powerful message of a life that was up and down and up?
I think there are many messages. One of them, of course, is it's so fascinating that Hashem chose Rabbi Akiva, the Almighty in heaven chose Rabbi Akiva to be the bearer of the Masorah. In fact, in many places, both in Torah Sanigla and Torah Sanister as well, Rabbi Akiva, Moshe Rabbeinu, we all know, is the lawgiver. Moshe was Makabel the Torah. He was the one who received the Torah on Har Sinai. And they say that Moshe received Torah shebichtav, Torah shebichsav, the written Torah. But if you look in the literature of Chazal, Rabbi Akiva was the Nosein HaTorah Shebal Peh. He was the one who gave us Torah Shebal Peh. Without Rabbi Akiva, it would have disappeared. There was this terrible plague where his students died, and the yeshivas had all closed down. There was nobody left to learn, but Rabbi Akiva, in his sharp and keen and aged mind, had the entire repository of the Torah. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose for the survival of Torah to go through Rabbi Akiva. But Rabbi Akiva didn't even start learning till he was 40 years old. It's not like Rav Chaim Kanievsky, Zichron Levracha, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, was born in the lap of the Stipler and he learned Torah his whole life. And he was an Am Haaretz. He knew nothing. The irony is incredible. It's almost like HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Shemayim is telling us, everybody out there, every single one of you, there is no limit to what you could do. Don't be affected by your circumstances. Don't think that you can't change your life and affect your destiny. And Rabbi Akiva went ahead and did that. And not only did he do it and become a great rabbi, he became the Nosein HaTorah Shebal Peh. It's just absolutely incredible that such a thing could happen in history, in the world. He was the bearer, the torch bearer of Torah Shebal Peh, and he didn't even open a Gemara till he was 40 years old.
Okay. You spend time writing about Rabbi Akiva's wife, Rachel. How is Rachel so integral to the legacy and to Rabbi Akiva's life? And how did you approach, through Chazal, her character in your Sefer?
Again, it follows I follow the Chazal. Chazal, the Megala Tefach, Mechasa Tefach, they reveal something but it's still hidden. It's very cryptic. I mean, we don't know how she met Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva worked for her father. He was a shepherd, watching sheep, and somehow they had some interaction. She saw something in him. She saw something. The Gemara says she saw that he was tsanua uma'ale. The Gemara says she saw that he was modest and he was of high character. Tsanua umale, and that but she also saw that he was ignorant. She saw that he wasn't learned. He wasn't spending his days, learning Torah. He was tending to sheep. But she saw something in him. We don't know exactly why or how, but she interacted with him and obviously told him, you can be a lot better than you are. And somehow they made this agreement that if he were to marry her, he would go and study in yeshiva, and he committed himself without the parents knowing. Rabbi Akiva's parents, we don't have really too much information about. But Rachel's father, Carlebach, when he eventually heard that she married this ignorant shepherd, was irate, and he disinherited her. And they went off together, totally impoverished. She came from luxury. Carlebach was one of the three wealthiest men in Eretz Yisrael at the time. He supported the poor people of Yerushalayim in those dark and troubled times. Yet he disowned his own daughter for running off with a an Amaretz. But she saw something, and look, she obviously was right. She saw something. She motivated him. He had tremendous abilities. He was bright. He was smart. He was Oiker Haram V'Teichnan, we say about Rabbi Akiva in the Arzei Halavanon when we talk about the Asara Aruge Malchus. Teichen Haram, he could grind a mountain down with his intellect. He could look at every single pebble, at every single thing. He was a tremendous genius. But he had no interest in studying until she motivated him to do so. So her schar is incredible. If he is the Nosein HaTorah Shabal Peh, she is the catalyst that caused it to happen. I do go into detail why she chose him, and there are many Mefarshim who talk about it. Why she could have married somebody else who was Male V'Tsanua and who also had started learning when he was younger. But she wanted to have. She saw something very special in him, and she brought it out for Klal
So,
Yisrael.
the midot were there. The learning wasn't there, but there was the midot, the character traits were there.
So I postulate, I did not see this in any other sefer, but it's a chiddush. I made an assumption. If we look quickly at Rabbi Akiva's death, so he was tortured by the Romans. They raked his body with combs of steel, and the Yerushalmi tells it this way, is that while they were doing so, he smiled. Rabbi Akiva was always the optimist and always kol ma da'avid Rahman al whatever Hashem did was for the good all throughout his life. But even in death, even in torture, he had a smile on his face when this was happening. And it irked his executioner to no end. How could it possibly be? And the Gemara says that his response was, Kol Yomai, Kol Yomai, all my days, I wondered how could I fulfill the mitzvah of Bechol Nafshecha. V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha Bechol Nafshecha. You must love Hashem with your entire soul. How can you love Hashem with your entire soul? He said, oh, my whole life I wondered how could I do that? And now I'm finally doing it. I know I'm dying from this. I know that I'm giving my life in the service of Hashem, in the honor of Hashem. I'm dying al Kiddush Hashem. So I'm so overwhelmed with joy that I finally understand and I'm able to do and fulfill this b'chol nafsh. So I simply point out that Rabbi Akiva's last message on earth, I don't think Rabbi Akiva's last message on earth was hyperbole when he said kol yomai. I think even well before he became a Talmud Chacham, even well before he was 40 years old, even when he was a young man, a teenager, and a young adult, he also davened Kriya Shema and said B'chol Nafshecha and wondered even then, how can I serve Hashem with my entire soul? How am I able? Kol Yomai. Even and Rachel saw that too. She not only saw a man of intellect and a man of a kind, generous, gentle man. She also saw someone who was tremendously devout and tremendously in love with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So all of those factors putting together attracted her to him, and she realized and recognized that she had a role to play, and she was going to motivate him. And of course, we know the famous story that when Rabbi Akiva became wealthy, he went out and bought her a Yerushalayim Shel Zahav. He bought her this beautiful tiara of gold. The Mefarshim say something to wear in her hair because Chazal tell us that when he was learning in yeshiva, he was away for those many years in yeshiva. She would cut her hair and sell it and take the funds and send it to him so that he could live and survive and have some money for himself in yeshiva. So he very much wanted to show how she honored him with her hair, and he honored her back with this Yerushalayim Shel Zahav.
You talk a little bit more. You had mentioned previously Rabbi Akiva being the the conduit in the Masorah, in the tradition. How was he compared to Moshe Rabbeinu? What are the Chazals, famous Chazals, where Moshe Rabbeinu sits in the study hall with Rabbi Akiva and he doesn't understand a word, and then Rabbi Akiva just simply explains everything, and finally says, "I don't understand this, but this is a law that comes from Moshe and Moses, and
Uh-huh.
that is it." How do you present? How does Chazal look at that? And um, no Masorah without Rabbi Akiva? It would have.
No, Chas v'shalom. I mean,
Right, right,
we certainly would have had a Masorah. Torah is
right,
eternal, and
right.
even had Rabbi Akiva. It's very interesting. We're a few days away from Lag BaOmer, and this is in the Sefer as well. I mean, one of the questions that everybody asks is why on Lag BaOmer it says in Shulchan Aruch it says Noagim Ktsas Simcha. The It's based on the tour. We 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 customarily enjoy and celebrate Lag BaOmer with joy. It's a day of joy. Why is it a day of joy? Because on that day, the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, his students, stopped dying. There were no more deaths. So the question is, obviously, that's the reason for celebration. The reason It's a reason to celebrate because no one died. No one died because they were all dead. No one died because they were all gone. There was nobody left to die. That's not a reason for celebration. So one famous answer is that I think the Pri Chodesh says Rabbi Akiva lost his student body. He lost every one of his precious Talmidim. And what did he do? He didn't fall into despondency. He didn't go and climb up into a shell. He got up and he went and he found 5 or 7 new Talmidim and he started again. Noyag in B'tzas Simcha, because we saw a man who never gave up, a man who went ahead and he rekindled Torah through Reb Meir and Reb Shimon Bar Yochai and his few Talmidim, and they are the ones who went on and taught Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. That's one answer. Another answer is the Ramami Pano says Rabbi Akiva too was supposed to die. Rabbi Akiva also was, there was a Gzeira in Shamayim that he should get the same fate as his Talmidim. For whatever reason, the fact that they weren't Noe Kavod Zebizeh was so egregious that they needed to be taken from the world. Their teacher too, who could not stem this inappropriate behavior, also deserved to die. But at the last second, the Gzeir and Shamayim changed. Rabbi Akiva was given the ability to continue life. Noyag im B'tzas Simcha. So we have Simcha on Lag BaOmer because the dying stopped one short of what it should have been. Ramami Pano says it should have been one more person who died, Rabbi Akiva himself. So the fact that we have the Torah of Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva was the conduit of our Torah, is the reason for Simcha. Somebody else would have been. Rabbi Yishmael was still alive. There were some Tanoim who survived and lived in other parts of Eretz Yisrael. There's no question Torah would have survived, but we have today a better, a more complete and more pure product because Rabbi Akiva, who was on a higher level than anybody else, was the conduit for that Torah. So it's not that Torah itself would have been gone.
And how does Chazal understand the Torah of Rabbi Akiva? What made the Torah of Rabbi Akiva so powerful and so unique?
It's a good question. I don't know. I don't really address that. I don't go into Rabbi Akiva, the halachic Rabbi Akiva in the
Yeah.
Sefer. I mean, Rabbi Akiva is one of the most prolific authors of halacha in the Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer Agadol,
Mhm.
who for some time was Rabbi Akiva's teacher, but eventually Rabbi Akiva rose up to become a colleague of Rabbi Eliezer, and there are hundreds and hundreds of disputes between them and dialogues and arguments and this and that. So it's not really an analysis of Rabbi Akiva's halachic Torah. That would take another sefer or two or three, to do that. but it does go through most of the agadata that Rabbi Akiva touches upon in his life. For example, the story of where he loses his donkey and his chicken and his light and then he sleeps out in the field, and at every moment he says Koma David Rahman al. It talks about Rabbi Akiva who obviously went to the Beis Hamikdash and saw the Churban, and at the same time his colleagues are crying and he is laughing. It goes through that. It goes through the entire Beitar incident. We talk about Rabbi Akiva's travels to distant lands. There's even a story of Rabbi Akiva. He was certainly in his 80s at least, being shipwrecked on his way back to Eretz Yisrael and hanging onto a plank from the boat to get home, to get to shore. I mean, we scarcely can imagine what these people went through to travel. He went west. He went west to Europe. He went to Rome, and those were on boats. They traveled on boats. He went east, as far east as Iran, and they traveled on, who knows, on camels, on beasts of burden. Just incredible, incredible avoda and work for Klal Yisrael to go to all these places and bring chizuk and halacha and information to Jews all over the world. Just an amazing,
So
amazing.
what do we know about those trips to the east? That was to Bavel, to the communities in Bavel. We have Agaritas about that. We have
Yes,
Nomer
yes,
Chazal.
there are many Chazal. He made at least 8 or 9 trips. We know he went to Rome. He went to Turkey. He went as far east as Iran. There's a famous Mishnah in Sanhedrin, which talks about Rabbi Akiva's opinion as to the 10 tribes and whether or not the 10 tribes will return. And Rabbi Akiva was the sweetest, kindest, most gentle of men, Sanua Umale, like we said earlier. Yet, Rabbi Akiva says, Aseres Hashvatim Einam Chozrim. 10 tribes are not coming back. The Gemara itself wonders. Shavke Rabbi Akiva lechasidus. Rabbi Akiva abandoned his traditional and normal kindness by saying something like that. And I suggest that it's because he actually traveled to the lands where the 10 tribes were to have been, and he realized that they had assimilated and that they had completely lost their Jewish identity. And he, therefore, when he came back and he went to the Beis Medrash, he says, Einam Chozim, they're not coming back. And it doesn't mean Rabbi Akiva believes that nobody from the 10 tribes will be repatriated when Mashiach comes. There will be members from the 10 tribes who are mixed up in our society, who lived in Yehuda when the southern kingdom of Eretz Yisrael was overrun by Nebuchadnezzar. There were already people from the Aseres Hashvatim living among Yehuda and Binyamin and among the Levium. There certainly were people, and there will be people from all the tribes when Mashiach comes. That's one of Eliyahu's jobs when he comes back, when he returns, is to tell us who is from who is a member of Yosef and who's a member of Ruvain and Shimon. But Rabbi Akiva said the ones who actually departed and left from the northern kingdom of Israel and went to Golus, those families are lost. Those families were irreparably and are irretrievable because they completely assimilated among the Goyim.
And as you mentioned, we're obviously in the period before Lag BaOmer during Sfira. What are some of the Mamrei Chazal that you encountered that attempt to explain the deeper reasons behind the death of Rabbi Akiva's students, his Talmidim?
Right. So we know many things about that time. Chazal do tell us many things, but one of the most interesting things that we don't know, and there is no definitive knowledge about this, is when in Rabbi Akiva's lifetime it happened. Doris Harishonim, Isaac Alevi, he believes it happened with Rabbi Akiva's early Talmidim, like either shortly before or shortly after the Churban, those 24,000 Talmidim of his that he came back 24 years later to his wife, and the Talmidim who shooed her away from him when she came and grabbed onto his feet. He says it's those Talmidim that perished and passed away. It's a very difficult position to understand because all of the Chazal that tell us the story quote from Koheles. Koheles says, "Baboker zrazarecha." In the morning, plant your seeds, ula erev, al tanach yodecha, and in the evening, don't withdraw your hand. Meaning, don't just, and Chazal understand that to mean just because you've gotten old doesn't mean you should stop doing important things in your life. And it gives many examples, but one of the examples it gives is Rabbi Akiva, who did not, in his old age, stop or cease from teaching Torah. And they go on to tell about his Talmidim dying. So it's very, very indicative that it was at the end of Rabbi Akiva's life. Many modern historians, many Israeli historians, and obviously from the Torah camp, from the non-Torah camp, as well as from the Torah camp, believe that Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim died in the war for Beitar. And somehow Rabbi Akiva, who supported Bar Kochba, wanted his Talmidim to engage in fighting for the heart and soul of Eretz Yisrael from against the Romans. But Chazal do seem to say that they died in a plague of askara, which is some kind of a choking disease. And it's very, very, I mean, there certainly is some basis to say they may have participated in that war. Um, there are certainly many sources that said it happened during the war, even though they may not have participated. So that's the biggest question. Exactly when? Was it during Beitar? Was it before Beitar? Certainly it was towards the end of Rabbi Akiva's life. But um, as far as the reason for their death, Chazal is very, very clear. Uh, they somehow had this improper improper interaction. There was a tremendous desire in his academy for Torah growth, but there was something lacking in their interpersonal relationship. There was people did not want to quote other people's Torah. They wanted to defend only their positions, etc. It's very, very difficult to understand why they deserve to die because of that. And that many Mefarshim asked the question. The one that resounded with me was the Taj Bates, who was a Rishon. He says that the reason they had to die was because what was going on in the yeshiva became public knowledge. And people outside the yeshiva had heard how there were these cliques and there were this and this. Everyone was defending their position and nobody respected each other and learning. And that word got out of the yeshiva, it got outside into the community. So it became, in his view, a Chilul Hashem. And Chilul Hashem is, if people, it got to the point that Tajbitz writes, where people would say, Oy loy me Torah. Woe is he who goes to learn Torah, because there was this competition and there was this uh, superiority complex that people had over each other, and that was going on in the yeshiva. And people said, "Woe is to those who study Torah," and that was a terrible chil Hashem, and that's why they deserve to die. But these are deep, deep matters. I do not go into any esoteric
Right.
answers, which to me, is really sometimes it's like a cop out because it's because this one was a Gilgul of this neshama and we have to be Masake and this thing or that. It could very well be that that's what's hidden behind, but it still doesn't mean we were able to not understand the basic shot. So those were very, very troubling times. But again, it was Rabbi Akiva who rose from the ashes and went to find new Talmidim, to start again, to never give up. And that's one of the lessons that we have from Rabbi Akiva.
And how do you present Chazal's view of Rabbi Akiva's role during the Great Revolt against Rome and his approach vis-a-vis regarding the leadership of Bar Kochba? Did he have a certain Masorah that he thought this was a period in Jewish history that could be a period of redemption, or was it coming from some other? How does Chazal interpret that?
So I think that this Sefer really clarifies some of those issues. Um, I found a fascinating Marsha. The Marsha writes that when Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues were was standing by the Har HaBayis, they went to visit Har HaBayis. And the Gemara tells us that when they approached Har HaBayis, they saw it from far away. Each of them tore kriya. That's the halacha. You have to tear kriya when you see the korban. But when they approached closely, they saw a shual, they saw a fox running out of the Kochei HaKadoshim. And Chazal say that the Rebbe Eliezer, Rebbe Gamliel, they burst out crying. His colleagues burst out crying, and Rabbi Akiva laughed. He smiled, and they were astonished. You see a shul coming out of the Kochei HaKadoshim, the Makom HaMikdash, where the Aron Kodesh was, where a place a Kohen couldn't even go into it. The Kohen Gadol couldn't go into it except on Yom Kippur once a year. Here, an unclean animal is running around in the Kochei HaKadoshim. Rabbi Akiva is laughing. Anyway, that is a whole different chapter, and obviously a sugya on its own to understand what went on. But the Maharsha points out and says one of the reasons that Rabbi Akiva was laughing is because he really felt that Bar Kochba, this is what the Maharsha writes, is that Bar Kochba, that Mashiach was imminent, that the arrival of Mashiach was going to be imminent. And now I question the Maharsha because I think the story, the visit to the base to the Har HaBayis took place well before Bar Kochba was even known, even before Rabbi Akiva knew Bar Kochba. But it opened up my eyes is that the Maharsha quotes a Gemara, and the Gemara says there's a pasuk in Chagai, and the pasuk says, let me read to you the pasuk. Pasuk says, Ki koyamar Hashem tzavakos, so has Hashem spoken, Od achas ma'ati, there will be one more, ma'ati, and it is a small one. V'ani marish es hashamayim, I will shake the heavens and the earth and the sea and the dry land. So Chagai says there is another one coming, and it is a small one. Remember, they had no Gemara, they had no they had no art scroll, they had no Mesifta, they had no Oitzer HaChochma to look up, all of these Tanai. They had a pasuk in Chagai. And Rabbi Akiva learned that when it says Oid Achas Ma'ati, the Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva's opinion was that what did Chagai Hanavi mean when he said Od Achas Ma'ati? He meant there's going to be another Churban, Od Achas, there's going to be another Churban. The first Beis HaMikdash, the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash is not the only Churban. There will be another one, but Ma'ati, the golus of the second Churban, is going to be Ma'at, less than the golus of the first. So Rabbi Akiva is sitting there 30, 40, 50 years after Churban Bayis Sheni with this belief that Chagai Hanavi had predicted that the Churban Bayis Sheni was going to be shorter, that the Golus Bayis Sheni was going to be shorter than Golus Bayis Rishon. Bayis Rishon was 70 years. We're coming up on 40, 50, 60 years. It's got to be the time for the Geula. And when he saw the Shual going out of the base Kochei HaKadoshim, which validated in his mind that the Nevuah of Zechariah was now possible to happen, that Od Yeshvu Zakenim Zakenos B'Rechova Sa'ir. So he was so happy because he really felt it was imminent. So when he saw Bar Kochba rise, Bar Kochba was an Erlich Yid. He was a tzaddik gomor. He was a really good, devout young man. Certainly compared to Rabbi Akiva, he was a young man. And he also was strong. And he had leadership qualities. And if you look in Yeshaya Hanavi, who gives you the required, the requisite traits of Mashiach, which is to be a gibor and to be an anav and to be a yarei shamayim. He had all those qualities. He was modest and he was strong and he could catch a boulder in his hands. The Gemara tells us and he had leadership qualities. He organized this revolt against Rome because the Romans had disallowed Shabbos and disallowed mikvah and had disallowed Mila. So Klal Yisrael had no choice but to fight back against the Romans, and who was leading them and organizing them and winning victory after victory after victory? It was this young man Bar Kochba. At the same time, Rabbi Akiva is looking at the calendar and he's saying, we're 50, 60 years after the Churban Bayis. It's got to be now because Oid Achas Ma'ati, it's going to be less than the Golus Rishon. So that influenced Rabbi Akiva very, very much. But the Rambam says it wasn't just Rabbi Akiva. The Chol Chachmei Hador. Rabbi Akiva was the Zokein Hador, and if Rabbi Akiva said something, everybody else, followed suit. There's one Tana who disagreed with Rabbi Akiva. He said, you're going to die before Mashiach comes. Grass will grow on your grave before you see. But that was an obscure Tana, and he was actually a Ger Tzedek who became later a Talmud Chacham, but not from the great Tanoim of that generation. And that's what Rabbi Akiva felt. Obviously, Rabbi Akiva was wrong. Rabbi Akiva erred. Rabbi Akiva was wrong in how he interpreted Chagai. We see that the Golus Sheni is an interminable thousands and we're almost 2,000 years into that Golus. And Rav Nosson in the Gemara, Rav Nosson at a different time disagrees with Rabbi Akiva. He said Rabbi Akiva was wrong. He said Od Achas Ma'ati means something completely different. He says it means that there will be another bias, but even during the reign of Klal Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael under the Bayis Sheni, he says that will be a reign where for the majority of our years with the Bayis Sheni, we will not be the rulers of the land. Between Greece and Rome, the majority of those 400 and something years, we were under occupation. So Od Achas, there will be another bias, but Ma'ati, we will only be in control of our own destiny within our own land for a minority of those years. So obviously Rav Nosson was right. That's what happened. And the Korban and the Golus was much, much longer than Rabbi Akiva anticipated. So these are factors that led to historical results. He supported Bar Kochba. He felt he was Mashiach. And we truly believe, by the way, that had Bar Kochba not faltered, maybe the facts on the ground would have been different. And maybe in retrospect, he would have been Mashiach and he could have been Mashiach, right? It's just that he couldn't rise to the occasion. At the end of the day, he faltered, and Bar Kochba proved not to be the leader perhaps he could have been.
And how does
fascinating stuff? No, isn't it just fascinating?
It's just one after another.
Mind blowing. It's mind blowing material.
It is just hard to fathom
Yes.
We'll get to one other aspect, and Rabbi Akiva's legacy, as we understand his Mesirat Nefesh at the end of his life, his martyrdom. What's the prism that Chazal presents this?
It's fascinating too. It's also very, very interesting. I have a chapter on his death, and I go through the parameters of Kiddush Hashem. What is Kiddush Hashem? What is martyrdom? Was it a case of Kiddush Hashem when he said, all my life I wanted to know how you serve Hashem with all your soul? Are there halachic lessons to be learned? So perhaps there is a three-way. There seems to be a famous argument between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Eliezer whether or not a person has to forfeit his life in private. In other words, if you're in private and the three cardinal sins come. Everybody knows you're supposed to die rather than violate the three cardinal sins. That's the halacha. The Rambam brings that down, and that's Rabbi Eliezer's position. Rabbi Shmuel disagreed. Rabbi Shmuel holds that if you're in private, stay alive, even for avodah zarah, even for shvichas. Well, shvichas dam maybe is different, but and gila rice might be different, but even for avodah zarah, bow down to the idol. You're not doing it because you want to bow down to the idol. You're doing it to save your life. Nobody's going to know about it.
No chilul Shem.
Right. It's not a chil Hashem because it's v'nikdashti b'soich b'nei Yisrael. Make a kiddush Hashem when b'nei Yisrael see. So we go into this whole thing with Rabbi Akiva. With one Gemara says there were Talmidim. The Yerushalmi doesn't mention anything about Talmidim. So was Rabbi Akiva in public? Was he in private? What was his opinion? Did he hold like Rabbi Shmuel? Did he hold like Rabbi? So I go into many of those things. But the truth is, most likely the entire episode was more a question about end of life behavior, not so much in terms of giving your life for Hashem or Kiddush Hashem. The question is does a person have obligations to continue to serve Hashem when one's life is in danger? And Rabbi Akiva said, yes, I still have to do. He was so happy that it was man Kriya Shema. He was so happy that he was able to say Kriya Shema one last time. They're torturing you. You're so weak. There's blood loss. You're losing your life. Yes, Rabbi Akiva said, even when a Jew is losing his life, even when he's at the end stages, even when he has a million excuses not to onus the Rahmana Patre, you could be don't think that you can't serve Hashem b'chol nafshecha, even at the moment of death, even when they're taking your life. And that is really more of what according to the Bavli, seems to have happened then. Rabbi Akiva was showing his Talmidim, Ad Kan Rabbeinu, they said, even so, even now, you want to do a mitzvah? Yes, even now, even when you might think I have other considerations, or I'm certainly not obligated, I can still do a mitzvah of serving Hashem out of love with my entire soul, meaning even when he's taking my soul. So not the question of Kiddush Hashem or whether you're obligated to give your life or not give your life. Certainly Rabbi Akiva wasn't going to, what's the word? He was certainly not going to shmad. He was not going to apostate himself to become a Roman, a pagan at his life. Even if he was allowed to, according to Rabbi Shmuel, you'd not be allowed to do so b'shas hashmad. You'd not be allowed, even in private b'shas hashmad, you can't do it because they would publicize it. So the question was, how far does the obligation to serve Hashem extend to a person under the intense distress of possibly losing his life? And that is what Rabbi Akiva experienced and went through and taught us forever. So when the people in Auschwitz said Shema Yisrael on their way to the gas chambers, they were mimicking Rabbi Akiva's behavior. He was the one who led us in that direction and said, you can be going to your death, but don't forget about Hashem. And don't use the opportunity, use that last moment of life to serve Hashem b'chol nafshecha. You can serve Hashem even when he's taking your soul. And that is the lesson of Rabbi Akiva under the hands of the Romans.
Okay. There's so much to talk about, but we will let the viewers and readers simply go online, and you got a little taste of what's in.
Just say one little thing. Rabbi Akiva, who was killed by the Romans, Eliyahu Hanavi. This is Chazal, Eliyahu Hanavi, together with Rabbi Akiva's faithful attendant, Rabbi Yeshua Agarsi. After Rabbi Akiva had died, Eliyahu Hanavi is the one who buried Rabbi Akiva. He came from Shemayim, came down in human form. He and Rabbi Yeshua Agarsi on Motzei Yom Kippur, on the night after Yom Kippur. Rabbi Akiva passed away on Yom Kippur, and they took him and they buried him. They took him to Tveria, where we have today at Sion for Rabbi Akiva.
Right.
And so many fascinating stories around his life and his death, and this looks at it in depth. I don't recommend anybody to sit down and read the book, the Sefer in one reading. It's something, take a chapter at a time.
Right.
It's like learning a sugya in Gemara. It's like learning a sugya in Chazal, each chapter on its own.
And maybe what's next? Eliyahu,
Ah,
maybe Rabbi Akiva, where do you go from here?
I'm really not sure. I don't have a personality that jumps out at me, with that kind of a fascinating. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai would be one, but again, his life is interconnected with the Zohar, and that's beyond my that's not my comfort zone. So I don't know, but I am writing a little bit of certain sugyas that I'm doing, and we'll see if maybe eventually it'll turn into a book form, and if not, not. But Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem.
Okay.
Thank you so much for this opportunity
Again,
to
thank you, and you should continue to go from strength to strength, from chayil to chayil.
okay.
Again, Rabbi Akiva, a really fascinating, wonderful work. And you can take it slow, as Rabbi Baby said. Take it slow. Any other closing remarks? Anything that you'd like to leave us with?
Well, you asked me before. I must have had a fascination with Rabbi Akiva many, many years ago, because in 1984, when I wrote the songs for the First Journeys album,
Hmm.
uh, and that's 40 years ago. So
Wow.
I had a song called Rabbi Akiva. He was a 40-year-old man. Akiva was his name. And one day he went down to the riverside and he saw crevice stones from the water's tide. So I already obviously had this, as do all Jews. I
Right.
think every Jew learns a little Torah. Every child in school, he's a legend. A legend for all of Klal Yisrael, a man of such amazing strength and fortitude, as well as an amazing life of stories and interactivities with other people and with the entire nation. So it's a mitzvah to know as much about him as possible, and it's an inspiration. So thank you so much for giving
Thank
me
you
this
very, very much.
opportunity.
Appreciate it.
Okay,
Thank you.
Call to all the
Thank you.
best.